Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Senior English B, and we turn now in our MyPerspectives volume to Dante's Divine Comedy, Inferno, Canto 34, the final canto of the Divine Commedia. Now, I'm with you on page 491 for background information, and then 492, 493 to begin this study. Now, one of the first things I'm going to recommend that you guys do is to hit learnstrong.net and the Senior B folder. And you're going to see some enhancement lectures there that are going to be very beneficial for you. One of those will be an introduction to Dante's Inferno, which I very much recommend that you watch. And then there will also be detailed lectures on specifically not just Canto 34, but a few cantos prior, so that you have some sense of what's going on. Dante's Inferno is our attempt in the MyPerspectives volume to introduce you to epic poetry, which of course we've already done in our senior year with Beowulf, and of course previously in our high school studies with Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and possibly the Aeneid, depending upon what course of study you've taken in high school. But here we are now to jump into the very concluding canto of Inferno. Now this is a very difficult thing to do without some background knowledge. Who is Dante? We'll get to it in a moment. What's going on in the Divine Commedia as a poem of 3 parts, telling first of all about Dante the Pilgrim's journey through hell, then purgatory, and finally paradise. And then finally, how does the poem, the section of the poem, the first section of the poem, the Inferno, how does it come to its fruition in Canto 34? This is difficult stuff to jump right into. I mean, you can get a sense of it and a little bit of a sense from the introductory comments that I'll give here, but I really recommend that you utilize the learnstrong.net enhancement lectures so that when you read this material, you have some real sense of what's going on. First off, let's just introduce you to Dante. I'm with you on 491. Notice his dates, 1265 to 1321. His visions of hell have haunted readers for centuries, and is widely considered one of the greatest poets of the Western civilization. I don't think there's any question about that, along with Shakespeare and Milton and Chaucer, we might add. Dante was born into a poor but noble family in the Italian city of Florence. At the time, Italy was not a unified nation, but a collection of independent city-states. He's elected to help run Florence's government. He and his party are overthrown in civil warfare that led to exile from his city in 1302. Most of his better-known works were written in exile, and that's significant. And my introductions to the Divine Comedy and to Inferno will help you in that regards, as posted on learnstrong.net. Unlike many of the writers of his age, Dante wrote in Italian. This is important in our comments when we talked about Chaucer deciding to write in Middle English. Same is true for Dante. Divine Comedy is his masterpiece and was written in the Italian language. Now, the background information that they give is sparse. I'll try to fill it in. In his epic poem, Dante documents his imagined visit to hell, purgatory, and heaven in 3 parts, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. Virgil, an ancient Roman poet, is the guide for Dante through the 9 circles of hell on their way to purgatory. We'll be in the 9th circle here in this canto. In this excerpt from Inferno, Virgil and Dante have arrived at the 9th circle, where those guilty of the worst sin, treachery, are found. The selection will begin with a translator's note from the great John Ciardi, and a noted translator and poet in his own right, who will offer his interpretation of the canto that follows. Let's just turn now, we'll listen to professional reader, taking notes as we go. Really mark this passage up for yourself, since you can write and you're consumable anyway. And especially the areas where you're uncertain what's going on. And pay some attention as well to some of the footnotes, and we'll come back to have some comments once the reading is completed.
Divine Comedy, Inferno, by Dante Alighieri, translated by John Ciardi.
On march the banners of the king. Virgil begins as the poets face the last depth. He is quoting a medieval hymn, and to it he adds the distortion and perversion of all that lies about him. On march the banners of the king, of hell. And there before them, in an infernal parody of Godhead, they see Satan in the distance, his great wings beating like a windmill. It is their beating that is the source of the icy wind of Cocytus, the exhalation of all evil. All about him in the ice are strewn the sinners of the last round, Utica, named for Judas Iscariot. These are the treacherous to their masters. They lie completely sealed in the ice, twisted and distorted into every conceivable posture. It is impossible to speak to them, and the poets move on to observe Satan. He is fixed into the ice at the center to which flow all the rivers of guilt, and as he beats his great wings as if to escape, their icy wind only freezes him more surely into the polluted ice. In a grotesque parody of the Trinity, he has 3 faces, each a different color, and in each mouth he clamps a sinner whom he rips eternally with his teeth. Judas Iscariot is in the central mouth, Brutus and Cassius in the mouths on either side. Having seen all, the poets now climb through the center, grappling hand over hand down the hairy flank of Satan himself, a last supremely symbolic action. And at last, when they have passed the center of all gravity, they emerge from hell. A long climb from the earth's center to the Mount of Purgatory awaits them, and they push on without rest, ascending along the sides of the river Lethe, till they emerge once more to see the stars of heaven, just before dawn on Easter Sunday.
All right, guys, here we go.
On march the banners of the King of Hell, my master said. Toward us, look straight ahead. Can you make him out at the core of the frozen shell? Like a whirling windmill seen afar at twilight. Or when a mist has risen from the ground, just such an engine rose upon my sight, stirring up such a wild and bitter wind, I cowered for shelter at my master's back, there being no other windbreak I could find.
Top of 494.
I stood now where the souls of the last class, with fear my verses tell it, were covered wholly. They shone below the ice, like straws in glass. Some lie stretched out, others are fixed in place, upright, some on their heads, some on their soles, another like a bow, bends foot to face. When we had gone so far across the ice, that it pleased my guide to show me the foul creature, which once had worn the grace of paradise. He made me stop, and stepping aside, he said, "Now see the face of Dis. This is the place where you must arm your soul against all dread." Do not ask, reader, how my blood ran cold, and my voice choked up with fear. I cannot write it. This is a terror that cannot be told. I did not die, and yet I lost life's breath. Imagine for yourself what I became, deprived at once of both my life and death. The emperor of the universe of pain jutted his upper chest above the ice, and I am closer in size to the great mountain the Titans make around the central pit than they to his arms now starting from this part. Imagine the hole that corresponds to it. If he was once as beautiful as now, he is hideous and still turned on his maker. Well may he be the source of every woe. With what a sense of awe I saw his head, towering above me, for it had 3 faces. One was in front and it was fiery red. The other 2 was weirdly wonderful, merged with it from the middle of each shoulder, to the point where all converged at the top of the skull. The right was something between white and bile. The left was about the color one observes on those who live along the banks of the Nile. Under each head 2 wings rose terribly, their span proportioned to so gross a bird. I never saw such sails upon the sea. They were not feathers, their texture and their form were like a bat's wings, and he beat them so that 3 winds blew from him in one great storm. It is these winds that freeze all Cocytus. He wept from his 6 eyes, and down 3 chins the tears ran mixed with bloody froth and pus. In every mouth he worked a broken sinner between his rake-like teeth. Thus he kept 3 in eternal pain at his eternal dinner. For the one in front the biting seemed to play no part at all compared to the ripping. At times the whole skin of his back was flayed away. "That soul that suffers most," explained my guide, "is Judas Iscariot, he who kicks his legs on the fiery chin and has his head inside, Of the other two, who have their heads thrust forward, the one who dangles down from the black face is Brutus. Note how he writhes without a word. And there, with the huge and sinewy arms, is the soul of Cassius. But the night is coming on, and we must go, for we have seen the whole. Then as he bade, I clasped his neck, and he, watching for a moment when the wings were open wide, reached over dexterously, and seized the shaggy coat of the king demon. Then grappling matted hair and frozen crusts from one tuft to another, clambered down. When we had reached the joint where the great thigh merges into the swelling of the haunch, my guide and master, straining terribly, turned his head to where his feet had been, and began to grip the hair as if he were climbing, so that I thought we moved toward hell again. "Hold fast," my guide said, and his breath came shrill with labor and exhaustion. "There is no way but by such stairs to rise above such evil." At last he climbed out through an opening in the central rock, and he seated me on the rim, then joined me with a nimble backward spring. I looked up, thinking to see Lucifer, as I had left him, and I saw instead his legs projecting high into the air.
496.
Now let all those whose dull minds are still vexed by failure to understand what point it was I had passed through judge if I was perplexed. "Get up on your feet," my master said. "The sun already mounts to middle tiers, and a long road and hard climbing lie ahead." It was no hall of state we had found there, but a natural animal pit hollowed from rock, with a broken floor and a close and sunless air. "Before I tear myself from the abyss," I said when I had risen, "O my master, explain to me my error in all this. Where is the ice? And Lucifer, how has he been turned from top to bottom? And how can the sun have gone from night to day so suddenly?" And he to me, "You imagine you are still on the other side of the center where I grasped the shanky flank of the great worm of evil, which bores through the world. You were while I climbed down. But when I turned myself about, you passed the point to which all gravities are drawn. You are under the other hemisphere where you stand. The sky above us is the half opposed to that which canopies the great dry land. Under the midpoint of that other sky, the man who was born sinless and who lived beyond all blemish came to suffer and die. You have your feet upon a little sphere, which forms the other face of the Utica. There it is evening when it is morning here, and this gross fiend, an image of all evil, who made a stairway for us with his hide, is pinched and prisoned in the ice pack still. On this side he plunged down from heaven's height, and the land that spread here once hid in the sea, and fled north to our hemisphere for fright. And it may be that moved by that same fear, the one peak that still rises on this side, fled upward, leaving this great cavern here. Down here, beginning at the further bound of Beelzebub's dim tomb, there is a space not known by sight, but only by the sound of a little stream descending through the hollow that is eroded from the mass of stone in its endlessly entwining lazy flow. My guide and I crossed over and began to mount that little known and lightless road, to ascend into the shining world again. He first, I second, without thought of rest. We climbed the dark until we reached the point where a round opening brought in sight the blessed and beauteous shining of the heavenly cars, and we walked out once more beneath the stars.
Now, as I said, we're jumping into an important poem at the end of the first part of that important poem, the Inferno. And that makes this study a little bit difficult. Now, if you've watched already my enhancement lectures, which I'm kind of hoping that you've paused and gone and watched those lectures, then you'll have some sense of what actually is transpiring here. The end of the first third of the leg of three legs of a journey that Dante the Pilgrim is going to take with Virgil as his guide through all of the first part, Inferno, and then part of Purgatory and Paradiso. The idea here is that the poem is symbolic of what it means to go through a very difficult time in one's life. And we're coming now to the conclusion of Inferno. And Dante the Pilgrim has seen some horrifically bad stuff. So bad that in fact he finds himself sitting down at one point and saying in Canto 24, I can't do it. And Virgil, the great Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid, Virgil, his guide, has to say to him, get up on your feet. We're going to hear those lines echoed at the very end of the poem. That is to say, when tough times come, you can't just sit, you got to work, you got to get up, you got to keep going, right? There's a further ladder yet to climb, Virgil will tell Dante earlier on in Inferno, and here we're going to go through that ladder. It's actually literally climbing up out of hell on the back of Satan. In the center of hell, and I'm not going to do a lot of description of this because I've done it elsewhere in lectures, we have Satan himself, munching with three mouths, eating Judas Iscariot, the great betrayer of Jesus Christ, as well as Brutus and Cassius, and of course we know that from our study of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Those are the traitors, the betrayers of JC, right? So we're going to have Satan then chewing away. We do have that gross image on 495, lines 51, 52, 53, where down the chins run the pus and the froth of the ones that he's biting. It's a grotesque kind of thing. Dante, the Pilgrim, will recognize at line 34, 35, the hideousness of Satan, reminding us at 3a of Milton and Satan as portrayed in Milton's Paradise Lost. And then the climbing out of hell. Now Dante will be involved in the medieval mythology of cosmology view, and so that's why he's coming through one side and coming out the other side, and now he's going to come to look on the mountain of purgatory. And then we do have the famous lines at line 94, get up on your feet, which is an echoing of earlier lines from earlier in the poem when Virgil had to say the exact same thing to Dante the Pilgrim. You got to get up, you got to keep going, you cannot just stop and rest. It's time, we got to keep going. And then out they go to the other side. A mention of Beelzebub's dim tomb on 131, line 131 on page 497 will remind us of our study of Golding's Lord of Flies, and of course the conversation with the Lord of Flies, that pig's head, that boar's head, with Simon in that classic novel. Now, let's work really quickly at level 2a. What exactly message theme-wise are we working with here? Well, Dante's fundamental message here is you don't go to hell, but rather through hell. That is to say, you've got to get through rough experiences. As we have said in other lectures, when bad things happen, don't ask, why did this happen to me? But rather learn to ask, why did this happen for me? This is the theodicy, and the answer to the theodicy question. We've talked at length elsewhere about the theodicy question. That is to say, why do bad things seem to happen in this world? Why is there so much suffering? Dante will provide us with an answer here in Inferno. Of course, we can talk at 2b about the major similes, the powerful word pictures that are here, and the language that's used. Some of you will read this and you'll decide you want to read all of Inferno, and you want to see all of my lectures on Inferno. They can be found at learnstrong.net in the AP folder, and I very much recommend that to you. It's a poem that you very much need to be familiar with. At 3a, we've mentioned Lord of the Flies. We can mention a number of other titles as well. This text is actually positioned next to Yeats's Second Coming, which you'll study on page 498 in our study of W.B. Yeats's classic Second Coming. The notion that hell is not just a place in metaphysical afterlife, but hell can be something that's created right here, right now. As the great existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre will say, hell is other people in his classic No Exit. I've spoken at length about that elsewhere, so I'll jump to 3b here really quickly. For you, what's the scariest experience that you ever went through? You got through it, and then you realized that you actually did learn something profound on the other side. That's Dante's Inferno, and I very much recommend that you go on ahead and read the rest of the poem so that you can enjoy Dante. Thank you.